The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. A leper came to Jesus and pleaded on his knees. "If you want to," he said, "you can cure me." Feeling sorry for him, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. "Of course I want to," he said. "Be cured." And the leprosy left him at once, and he was cured. Mind you say nothing to anyone, but go and show yourself to the priest, and make the offering for your healing prescribed by Moses as evidence of your recovery. The man went away, but then started to talk about it freely and telling the story everywhere, so that Jesus could no longer go openly into any town, but had to stay outside in places where nobody lived. Even so, people from all around would come to him. The Gospel of the Lord. So depending on which time of the day you're viewing, good morning, good afternoon or good evening. This particular Gospel narrative, in which we have the encounter of Jesus with a person who is deeply afflicted, is one which I find to be a most deeply moving account. There is intense suffering, absolute compassion, and profound healing. The suffering is bound up with the physical affliction, but more deeply with exclusion from the community, with isolation. Maybe in that man and in the people around him echo deeply the sentiments expressed in the book of Leviticus, which we also heard today. Unclean, unclean, let him live outside the camp. And while there's an understanding that some of those ancient ritual or dietary practices amongst the Jewish people were spiritualized presentations of health requirements, that takes nothing away from the profound sense of isolation suffered by this man and others in his situation. Jesus here and consistently elsewhere in word and deed expresses, affirms the intention of God that no one be excluded. We can easily look how this gospel applies elsewhere, but let us start with ourselves, with how the experience of the person who is suffering affliction resonates with each one of us. There is a sense deep within which each of us is aware of our own frailty, our own vulnerability. One of our greatest fears in life, in relation to others and in relation to God, is that we are isolated or excluded. That is a fear that each of us have. It starts from our earliest years, from how sometimes we may be treated by other children. But it's a fear that can remain in many ways throughout our whole life in our personal, family, and societal lives. The recent situation we're facing in relation to the COVID pandemic has highlighted the suffering of isolation and exclusion, even if it is temporary. How much more so for those people who suffer this in a more enduring form. The other aspect of who we are is our need for relationship. So this need for relationship, this need for healing, is deeply embedded in us. This is ongoing every moment of our lives until we are drawn into the fullness of communion of life with one another and God. The gospel speaks to us of our need for grace and of continual transformation. As the gospel speaks of the truth of God's absolute love for each revealed in Christ, it also, by implication, speaks of how we should deal with one another. The responsibility of all of us, again at the personal and at the communal level, to be attentive to the situations where people are in circumstances that they suffer isolation and exclusion. This can be institutionalized in many forms, and it can be very much a reality at the personal level as well. So those implications are in the realm of family, of friendship, of society, of the political life of the community, and economical. There is a tension often in church, which the church often gets wrong or can be perceived in a misunderstood way, in communicating the absolute acceptance of persons in their diversity for who they are, even as the church is called to be humbly prophetic in reflection, together with all people of goodwill, on the ethical significance of human behaviour. A good parallel and example is that in the life of Jesus. The difference, of course, Jesus could speak with absolute integrity. We speak with flawed integrity. Nevertheless, in the example of Jesus, there is one who is able to affirm persons in their absolute dignity and never to isolate, and at the same time to be able to challenge how we live, how we follow the gospel. There's an immense responsibility on all of us to communicate to one another in our limited way what Jesus communicated to our afflicted friend in the gospel. Absolute acceptance, don't remain outside the camp. Jesus himself, by responding to this man, had to live outside the camp in the sense of away from where people were. And in its fullest sense, this was made very clear in the Passion. Jesus communicates to us God's intention that nobody be outside and that we seek to be inclusive in our relationships with one another. I wish you a happy Sunday, and as the Pope says, a good lunch on Sunday. God bless.